The tow receipt read $436. The tire marks in my driveway were still fresh when I returned home carrying groceries, staring at the empty spot where my Honda Ridgeline had been parked. Brenda Harwick stood near the mailbox with a smug smile, arms folded like a neighborhood queen who had just finished issuing royal punishment to someone she decided didn't belong. The lavender perfume hit my nose before her words did, sharp and arrogant, like someone who believed authority came from a clipboard and a Lexus SUV. "Commercial vehicles aren't allowed here," she said coldly, tossing my veteran parking permit into a trash bin like it meant absolutely nothing. 23 years serving in the Army Corps of Engineers had taught me patience, discipline, and strategic thinking, but standing there watching that permit hit the trash tested every ounce of restraint. I had just retired 6 months earlier and moved my family to Willowbrook Heights, hoping for quiet mornings, green lawns, and peaceful evenings after decades of military deployments. My wife Carmen worked exhausting shifts as a nurse at the VA hospital, treating veterans who returned from war carrying invisible scars heavier than any combat gear. Our daughter Sophia finally had her own bedroom instead of another temporary military housing unit painted in dull government beige. Willowbrook Heights looked perfect when we first arrived. Manicured hedges, identical mailboxes, and quiet streets that promised stability after years of constant relocation. But neighborhoods like this sometimes hide a different kind of battlefield, one where power-hungry HOA presidents patrol streets searching for someone new to control. Brenda Harwick ruled Willowbrook Heights like a suburban general, cruising slowly in her white Lexus with a clipboard, documenting imaginary violations with obsessive enthusiasm. The first time she approached me was a Tuesday morning while I loaded tools into my truck for a simple trip to Home Depot. She introduced herself with that same artificial smile and immediately labeled my Honda Ridgeline a commercial vehicle, something supposedly forbidden by the HOA covenant rules. I glanced down the street where Carl Henderson's identical white pickup truck sat proudly in his driveway, untouched by HOA authority and completely ignored by Brenda's inspections. Carl's truck was the same year, same model, same size, yet somehow it didn't qualify as a violation in Brenda's carefully selective enforcement system. 2 days later, I woke to the sound of diesel engines and backup alarms echoing outside my bedroom window just after sunrise. Through the blinds, I watched a tow truck driver hook chains to my Ridgeline, while Brenda supervised from the sidewalk like a commander directing battlefield artillery. The driver looked uncomfortable, explaining he only followed work orders submitted by the HOA president claiming the vehicle violated community commercial vehicle restrictions. Brenda smiled again when I protested, calmly reminding me that homeowners agreed to follow HOA rules the moment they purchased property inside Willowbrook Heights. That afternoon, I paid $436 at the impound lot just to retrieve a perfectly legal personal vehicle that had never violated any real law. As I signed the release paperwork, something from my military training quietly clicked into place inside my mind. Engineers in the Army learn one critical principle. When someone declares a fight, you respond with preparation, strategy, and overwhelming evidence. Driving home with my truck that evening, I realized Brenda Harwick had just started a war she clearly believed she had already won. The next morning, I opened the thick binder containing every document from our home purchase, including the full HOA covenant agreement that most homeowners sign without reading carefully. Years of military engineering work taught me something simple. Systems always contain weaknesses, and rules written by overconfident people often hide loopholes big enough to drive trucks through. I started highlighting sections related to vehicle definitions, enforcement procedures, board authority, and towing policies that seemed suspiciously vague or legally incomplete. One paragraph immediately stood out because the wording was strangely specific about what actually qualified as a commercial vehicle under Willowbrook Heights regulations. According to the covenant language, commercial vehicle required permanent company branding, business equipment racks, or weight ratings exceeding 3/4-ton capacity. My Honda Ridgeline had none of those characteristics, which meant Brenda's towing order had no legitimate rule supporting it. But that discovery alone wasn't enough, because HOA presidents rarely admit mistakes unless someone forces them to publicly acknowledge the facts. I decided the best response wouldn't involve shouting arguments in the street, but instead a methodical approach that mirrored how military engineers solve structural problems. First step involved gathering evidence from the neighborhood that Brenda's enforcement rules only seemed to apply, and she personally decided they should. I walked the streets of Willowbrook Heights that afternoon, carrying my phone camera and documenting every pickup truck parked peacefully in resident driveways. By sunset, I had photographs of 19 different trucks, several larger than mine, all sitting comfortably without violation notices or tow warnings. Carl Henderson's white pickup alone violated at least 3 of the covenant definitions Brenda had claimed applied to my vehicle. Yet Carl had lived here 10 years without ever receiving a single HOA warning letter. The second step involved reviewing public property records for the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association board members. HOA boards often operate quietly until someone checks their paperwork against actual state housing regulations. Within an hour of searching county filings, I discovered something Brenda probably hoped nobody would ever investigate. Her position as HOA president had technically expired almost 14 months earlier without a recorded board election replacing her, according to state homeowner association laws. That meant any enforcement actions she authorized during that time might not be legally valid, including the towing order she issued against my truck. That discovery alone could force the association to reimburse the tow fee, but I wasn't finished gathering information yet. The third step required something every engineer respects: precise documentation organized into a timeline nobody could easily dispute. I printed the covenant definitions, my vehicle specifications, the neighborhood truck photographs, and the HOA board expiration records. Then I assembled everything into a clean, labeled report, like the engineering briefings I used to prepare for Army project reviews. Carmen watched quietly from the kitchen table while I arranged the pages in careful chronological order. "You look like you're planning a tactical operation," she joked, sipping coffee while reading over my shoulder. I smiled slightly because she wasn't entirely wrong about that observation. Duh. Military planning teaches that the strongest response isn't loud confrontation, but undeniable evidence delivered at exactly the right moment. That moment arrived 3 days later when Brenda posted a new notice on our mailbox. The paper declared that my truck would be towed again if it remained visible in the driveway after 48 hours. She must have believed the first towing incident had intimidated me into submission, like most homeowners probably reacted. Instead, that notice gave me the final piece needed to move the situation beyond neighborhood intimidation. I contacted a local attorney named Marcus Feldman, who specialized in homeowner association disputes across the county. Within 20 minutes of reviewing my documentation, Marcus leaned back in his chair with a quiet smile. "Mr. Alvarez," he said carefully, "your HOA president may have just created a serious legal problem for herself." He explained that unauthorized towing under invalid HOA authority could qualify as wrongful property seizure under state civil law. Combined with selective enforcement evidence, the association might face significant financial liability if challenged formally. Marcus suggested sending a legal notice requesting reimbursement of the towing fee and immediate suspension of further enforcement actions. But he also suggested something else that sounded far more satisfying. State HOA law required annual board elections documented in county records and open to all homeowners in the community. Willowbrook Heights had not filed election documentation for nearly 2 years. That meant any homeowner technically had the right to request an emergency election meeting supervised under state compliance rules. And once that meeting occurred, Brenda's authority could disappear in a single neighborhood vote. The following Monday afternoon, Marcus mailed a certified legal notice to the Willowbrook Heights HOA Management Office. The letter requested reimbursement of the $436 towing fee and demanded proof of Brenda's legal authority to enforce parking violations. It also included a formal request for a community board election meeting within 30 days, as required by state housing regulations. 3 days later, Brenda knocked on my door for the first time since the towing incident. Her confident smile was gone, replaced by a tight expression that suggested she had finally spoken with the HOA's legal advisor. "You didn't need to involve lawyers," she said stiffly, while holding the certified letter envelope. I simply replied that engineers solve problems using documentation, not arguments on sidewalks. The emergency election meeting took place in the community clubhouse exactly 4 weeks later. Nearly every homeowner attended after learning the HOA had been operating outside proper legal authority. Several residents spoke openly about warnings and fines Brenda had issued over the past year. When the votes were counted, the results were immediate and overwhelming. Brenda Harwick lost the HOA presidency by a margin so wide the room fell completely silent. The new board chairman stood up and announced the first official action of the reorganized association. All improper fines and towing fees issued under Brenda's expired authority would be reimbursed to affected homeowners. My $436 check arrived by certified mail the following week. Brenda's white Lexus still occasionally drives through Willowbrook Heights, but now it moves quietly without the authority she once assumed belonged to her. The clipboard disappeared shortly after the election. My Honda Ridgeline has remained parked in my driveway ever since, without another violation notice. Carl Henderson still parks his larger truck beside mine every evening after work. Sometimes he laughs about the day Brenda tried to turn the neighborhood into her personal rulebook. Willowbrook Heights is peaceful again, though the homeowners read HOA documents far more carefully these days. Engineers understand systems best when they break under pressure and reveal the flaws nobody noticed earlier. Brenda's system broke the moment someone challenged it with facts instead of fear, and once the facts appeared in front of the entire neighborhood, the outcome was never really in doubt. The most interesting part of the story came months later, during a casual conversation at the mailbox. A neighbor quietly admitted Brenda had to sell her house after losing several legal disputes with the HOA board. Apparently, her attempt to control the community had created problems she could no longer afford to resolve. I never celebrated that outcome because power struggles rarely end cleanly for anyone involved. But every time I park my truck at home now, I remember one simple lesson from military engineering. Systems built on intimidation collapse the moment someone documents the truth and calmly refuses to move.